But anyway, everybody, thank you for coming back to another Fridays with Rocky. And at the last episode, we had discussed with Krista Terrell about sort of the landscape of arts funding. And we did a deep dive in sort of the history of arts funding in the Charlotte metro area. And we did highlight a lot of the inequities. And yes, it was definitely a little bit of a gloves off, sort of raw truth particular episode, which is good because you have to have those kind of conversations before any real change can occur. Now, today's discussion, though, is going to be a little bit more on the forward-thinking side. And so one of the things we elicited from that conversation with Krista was a very popular program that Arts and Science Council has been partnering in the community about, and that's called Culture Blocks. And so we have folks here from Arts and Science Council and also from the public library itself, who is a partner in the Culture Blocks program, to discuss a little bit. And so honestly, today's discussion is a little bit more of turning the platform over to the great folks from the Arts and Science Council and from the public library. And if you have slides available, please, utilize those as well. But at this time, maybe we could hear a little bit about, to our audience, what is Culture Blocks? How do you get involved, and how long has it been around? And just sort of give sort of the elevator speech about the Culture Blocks program for the audience.
Yes, well, good morning, everybody. I'm Ebony Lewis, Program Director of Culture Blocks, and very excited to be here. So thank you so much to Rocky and to the Library Foundation for having us here today. So with me today are Liz Fitzgerald and Brandella Foster, who are going to share a little bit about some of the funding opportunities as well as some of the programs that we run at the Arts and Science Council. The first slide that you see here is something that we're really proud of, and it is our commitment to cultural equity. It is a statement that can be found on our website, something that we govern ourselves by when making funding decisions, when making decisions about programming and changes at the organization. And it's really, really important that the community sees themselves represented in the work that we do. And so I just really wanted to share this. From a sense of and place of pride, as you did mention, our organization has really talked about a lot of the changes that we have been implementing over the past few years. And so with every presentation we do, we'd like to start with this, even with our funding panels. When panelists are making decisions about funding, we start those meetings as a reminder that this is how we guide and govern ourselves. So before we get into Culture Blocks, Rocky, if you don't mind, we're actually going to hear from Liz, who's going to talk about Cultural Vision Grants, which is one of the many funding opportunities that ASC has to offer. So Liz,
Absolutely.
I'll turn it over to you. Okay, thank you.
It's a real pleasure. And I think we can go to the next slide and we'll start with that. My name is Liz Fitzgerald, and I am the Director for Community and Artist Support at ASC. And as part of that, one of the programs that I facilitate is our Cultural Vision Grant Program. Historically, ASC had project grants. It was kind of an all call to the community of what art, science, history program do you have going on, and panels made decision based on kind of what ended up in the pool. And about 7 years ago, we really reconsidered how we were approaching that funding to the program and wanted to really, as Ebony already spoke to, really center community priorities, really hearing from the community what were the ways that they wanted to engage with art, science, and history. And one of the things that I think is really important about that change is that in centering those community priorities, we've also really been able to center the creatives that make this work happen in our community at all levels. And so Cultural Vision Grants are provided by arts and culture organizations. They're provided by organizations that may have another mission, but that are using art, science, and history to really drive their connection with the community. And our programs are also led by creative individuals. So you don't have to be a formal 501c3 to be able to get through the Cultural Vision Grant Program. We really have 4 particular goals that we heard from the community that we wanted to leverage through Cultural Vision Grants. The first of that is people really look to our creative sector to help us build community across points of difference. I think there's a lot in the that the Opportunity Task Force and others have looked at that show that in many ways are kind of in our daily lives, we still kind of go and interact with folks that look like us, sound like us, have similar experiences, and we don't often get out and experience others in our community and share those kind of commonalities across pieces. And so cultural vision grants that are designed to help us connect across those points of difference are a real important piece of the work that we're doing. The second thing that we really heard from the community was how important it is that we are a community of folks that we have the Charlotte unicorns that have always been here, but we have many others that have found their way to Charlotte, and we all call this home. And one of the great pieces of what we can do through arts and science and history programming is really celebrating those traditions that we have, that we bring with us. And there's a real intention about making sure that we preserve those traditions and that we celebrate those differences as we come together as a community. The third goal that we have with Cultural Vision Grants is really recognizing that as a community, we are facing very complex issues, whether we're talking about the issues around racism, whether we're talking about housing issues, whether we're talking about mental health of our community. There are lots of ways that our creative leaders help us to think outside of the box about how we may approach those questions that we have as a community, help us really come together and see the issues from a different perspective and perhaps to offer different alternatives of ways that we can work together. And so we use Cultural Vision Grants to enable our creative sector to lead us in using art, science, and history to address those complex community issues. And the fourth goal that we have is we also want to celebrate kind of what is unique that Mecklenburg County has to offer the world. Why would people come to Charlotte to experience arts and culture? And so we really encourage innovation and people kind of trying out new ways of interacting. We know that that our audiences really want to be a part of the work now. It's not just wanting to sit in an audience, but really wanting to engage. And so by increasing innovation through groundbreaking work, we're really able to engage the community in being part of putting that stamp of what does it mean to be a Charlotte creative. So these awards, like I said before, they can go to creative individuals, they can go to organizations. It's up to $10,000. And what I think is really unique about the program is that this is meant to match the support that is already there for these programs in the community. So whether that is other sponsorships or cash that organizations or individuals have already raised for their programming, or whether that's the in-kind support that they receive through volunteers or businesses willing to offer space to a program. ASC is really meeting what the community has already said, this is a priority for us, and we're matching that to really be able to leverage that programming in the community. So I hope that you will see our Cultural Vision Grants at work in the community. I know this weekend we have the Festival in the Park is happening. That is supported through a Cultural Vision Grant. And so that can be a good example of that kind of opportunity to bring community together across difference. We can look at things like in a couple of weeks, we're going to have the Dragon Boat Festival happening up at the lake in Cornelius, and that is a fabulous celebration of the Chinese dragon boat tradition and a festival of artists and creatives from our Asian community that is here. I think of programming that QC Family Tree has done that really is intentional about lifting up the stories of our West Side neighbors, making sure that they're able to hold on to the tradition as they're facing the consequences of gentrification that is happening there, and really making sure that we know who those people are and what those stories are. Hannah Hassan had done some really important work in that, and I think in that way, addressing some of those complex community issues. So lots of really excellent programming that is out there supported through cultural vision grants. So that's that first way that ASC really has interacting with the community. And I'll pitch it over to Ebony now.
Well, actually, Liz, may I ask a question before you go?
Please do.
Okay, a quick one. With the previous slide, it was asked that it says generally that participants have to do a match the grant dollar for dollar. Why is that the case?
So it can be dollar for dollar, or it can be through in-kind contributions, right? But what we're really aiming with cultural vision grants is kind of identifying programs where folks have already been intentionally building relationships in community, and ASC is coming in to really leverage those partnerships that are already in place. So that is just one of our grants and one of the ways, but it is really intentionally about recognizing where has our community already invested and how can we bring that to even greater fruition.
And Liz, how often is the cultural vision grant available? Is it on a round basis, like a rolling basis, or is there a particular application period that folks in the audience or those need to know in the community?
Yeah, absolutely. So we do a call typically about twice a year for the cultural vision grants. We just closed our call this fall, and we'll have another one in the spring. But the programming that folks, when they do receive a grant, it might be that it's for a program that's happening over a weekend, or it could be ongoing programming. So I think of Lorien Academy for the Arts and the work that they do to offer classes and after-school programming for our middle and high school students who are really wanting to kind of develop their capacity to be professional artists and get that training with many of the creative leaders that we have in the community. It's a great program, and so that's programming that gets sustained over several months. So the grants might be used over a longer period of time, but we do the call twice a year.
So it sounds like any organization or a community that tends to have like maybe an annual festival or annual, whether it be culinary or arts or literature, some sort of thing, that this would be a good grant to be aware of, to kind of give a little extra oomph to your already existing program or festival or something. I mean, obviously this is not just about festivals. I wouldn't put that out there, but it does sound like for those in the audience who are kind of connected to groups that put whatever particular, organization, community that you're from, that this is something that you should be aware of, that at least there's an opportunity to kind of even spice up, probably bring in an extra singer, I don't know, something, those sort of things that, could help spice up your particular, cultural festival or artistic festival. So this is great. This is good stuff to know. And I think the more that folks in the Charlotte area know about this, I think that you'll see more usage.
Indeed.
All right. So let's keep the show going.
Okay, no problem. So we will transition and talk about culture blocks. So first of all, I always like to give a big shout out and thank you to the county manager and to the Board of County Commissioners, because the Culture Blocks program is fully funded by Mecklenburg County. And so definitely want to thank them for their support. And as a result of that funding, there are community partners the Culture Blocks program has with Charlotte Mecklenburg Library and Mecklenburg County Park and Recreation. And these community partnerships allow us to be able to deliver quality cultural experiences and programming close to where residents, neighbors across Mecklenburg County live. And that really kind of is the root premise behind the Culture Blocks programs. It is allowing residents to engage in pretty much programs and experiences that are already taking place close to where they live. The program was started as a way to respond to a quality of life survey that was done that looked at where residents across Mecklenburg County, where they live, and those who engaged or had cultural interactions. And to be clear, the definition of cultural interactions for that survey was for people who were donors or maybe bought tickets to events for organizations that were receiving at that time operating support from Arts and Science Council. And so when those results were put on a map of Mecklenburg County, you could see some discrepancies in terms of where residents lived that maybe had little to no interaction. And so the whole purpose of the program is to really be able to kind of flip that map and to deliver programs for residents that would be of interest. And so I like to tell people with the Culture Blocks program, what we do and kind of how we guide ourselves is that we are working with community and not doing to community. So the programs that take place through Culture Blocks are programs that are born out of the feedback that we receive from residents. We go into their 10 designated blocks, and there is a slide coming up in a little bit that shows on the map where those designated geographies, or as we call them, where those blocks exist. And so we go out and we ask questions. We'd like to know what's going on already in your community. Anybody that's in the cultural community knows that there's a lot of great talent, a lot of great happenings that are going on all across the county, any day of the year. And so we like to find out what's going on. That's a great way for us to get to know and to meet new creatives in our community. We also like to ask, what would you like to have happen? For example, if you have a family with young children, what types of programs would you like for your children to be able to be involved with? For seniors, our senior neighbors, we like to know what types of events and activities are of interest to you. And those questions are important to ask because oftentimes people choose not to engage in experiences or activities, maybe due to lack of representation, due to lack of interest. And so that's why, again, working with community is really important. We also ask the question, how do you find out about programs? Like I mentioned, there are things that go on every single day out of the year, lots of wonderful things. And sometimes those aren't well attended because people don't know about them. So we want to know, how do you find out about programs to make sure that we are doing a good job of spreading the word and getting information to residents. One of the great things about the program is that it is free for participants. So any resident who would like to engage in a Culture Block program is able to do so at no cost. And that is, again, due to the funding from Mecklenburg County. I mentioned, again, our community partners. And those community partnerships are really important because those are spaces, library branches, and recreation centers that already exist out in community. So many people drive by and they utilize their public libraries or recreation centers for a variety of different reasons and things. And it's a great way to activate those spaces and to bring a few more cultural programs out into community. Programs also can take place at churches. They can take place out in fields. We can have pop-up events where there might be a building that is not occupied by a long-term tenant that people can use for programming. That could be like a one-day event or can be a series of events. The great thing about Culture Blocks programs is that they look like a whole lot of different things. They can range from a music performance by bands and musicians to songwriting workshops. So not only are these programs for residents, but they're also a great way for some of our creative individuals or people in our community who have hidden talents, who are wanting to better develop and fine tune their craft. And so we've had providers do songwriting workshops. There's one currently going on right now about music production. So to teach people about the business of music production. These can be drum circles, it's just a variety of different programs, clay programs. There have been dance programs that not only feature or highlight a diversity of dance genres, be it salsa, be it African dance, but there's also an organization, a group that is doing programming right now for those of our neighbors who are visually impaired. And so again, really working with and trying to meet the needs of our neighbors is really important for the Culture Blocks program. Next slide, please. So I already really spoke to this in terms of how the program works. Again, it is important that we find out from the community. We like to give the people what they want. And that is exactly how the culture program works, is responding to what residents say they would like to have happen. So typically before the pandemic, we were doing community meals. There are now 10 designated blocks. We were doing community meals in each of the blocks. And at these meals, we were obviously serving food, serving a meal, and we were really intentional about trying to reach community. So we would make sure to have a restaurant or a caterer that was based in that respective block, because it might have been a way to introduce residents to maybe a different type of food that they've not had, or a catering service that maybe they can utilize in the future if they have catering needs. At these community meals, we also have performances and activities as a way to give people a snapshot as to what Culture Blocks looks like. And then we would have facilitated conversation to ask those questions that I mentioned a little bit earlier, to get the feedback that really helps to drive and to shape the programming that happens through Culture Blocks. Next slide, please. And this is just a map of Mecklenburg County. And as you can see, there are 10 areas that are shaded different colors. And those are the 10 geographies where Culture Blocks programs exist. So in each of these blocks, you will find Culture Blocks programs taking place. Right now, there is a hybrid of program delivery due to the pandemic. So there are some programs that are being delivered virtually, but there are also some programs that are taking place in person. We are very excited to share that the program has grown a lot since its infancy. The program is 5 years old, going on 6. And we started with 5 designated geographies or blocks, and now we have expanded to 10. And so it includes all of the surrounding towns outside of Charlotte, as well as a few designated geographies within Charlotte proper. So, Rocky, do you have a question? Yep.
Yeah. Well, wow. I mean, that's really good. So you went from 5 to 10. Are there any so if I'm in a community that may not be in the 10, is there a process to kind of apply to become a culture block, or is it something that sort of happens organically, like you sort of come across a community that may need a culture block, or how does that work? How do you expand that?
Yeah, so the expansion happened really by looking again at the results from that survey that I mentioned earlier. And so looking at those areas in Mecklenburg County where there was little to no engagement in terms of cultural interactions. So for those areas where there was high interaction or engagement, the program really isn't, not that it's not for, and not that people can't participate, but it really is geared towards those communities, those areas where there was little to no cultural interaction and engagement. Anyone in the county, you can attend programs across the block. So you're not limited to just attending programs within your designated geography. So it is okay, for example, if you live in Pineville, to travel up to Huntersville if there's a program that's going on that really is of interest. I will though say that the programs, the way that they are marketed towards the residents that live within and near those communities. So for example, we have a text program. And when people opt into our text program, they receive information about programs that will take place within their designated geography based on the zip code that they entered. So what's also great is that, again, it really helps to keep residents informed about the happenings that are taking place in their respective communities.
So it sounds like in these culture block areas, they're sort of designated places that, folks can, so because in my conversation with Krista in our last episode, we sort of were highlighting, that there is sort of one view of arts and culture in the community, which is just go to Tryon. That's where all the arts is, right? Just if you can find parking, then you're good to go, right? And I think that there's a countervailing view, which obviously it really should never be an or, this should be an and, discussion, but somehow when funding is available, and decisions are made, sometimes they like to put the or as opposed to the and in those situations. But from what you're saying in arts and science and the kind of direction that we've been able to kind of tell is, looks like that it is coming to your community, and it is a much more it sounds like it's more like arts for us, less for them, an approach. And so I think those of you who, if you're looking at this map and you are in those areas, of course, you can travel to wherever. I mean, nobody stopped you from traveling from art before, so, but at least these are areas where the homegrown talent, the folks that, don't feel like they have to uproot themselves, to downtown or something like that, they can still get, the cultural and artistic enrichment that just about anybody else is allowed to get. If not, more unique in many respects than what you'll obviously see, because, a lot of stuff uptown is just transported in from, the next big large city, so that's kind of kind of how that operates. But can you tell us, like, what can we in the community, do to help support both the vision grant, but definitely, the culture blocks, and how can we make it even more vibrant? Because I know it's a symbiotic relationship with arts and science, and obviously the community. What can the community do?
Absolutely. So one of the things that would be really helpful in terms of community support is sharing feedback. And so I mentioned, typically we have these community meals. We hosted virtual block parties last year because we weren't doing things in person. But those feedback sessions are really where we get the information that's used for providers. So for those people who apply for funding to actually deliver the programs, they're applying based on the feedback that we receive from residents. Feedback meaning, again, the types of programs. So if in, let's say, for example, Block 6, they said there was a lot of requests for multicultural programs or dance programs. Those programs that take place in the blocks are a result of the feedback that we get from residents. So whenever we have a virtual block party or a community meal, please participate, please come. We're not limiting feedback to just those specific events and those time frames. So throughout the year, we would love to be able to engage in conversation with residents. For neighborhood associations, when you have your meetings, would love to come out and spend some time talking about culture blocks and getting feedback from residents and neighbors through that vehicle. Again, I mentioned our text program is a great way to stay engaged with what's going on. So for those that are interested in signing in, if you want to opt in, you can type the word culture to 797979, and then you'll fill out this form, and that's a great way to get information. But also bringing come to programs. There's no better way for you to really get a feel for what culture blocks looks like than participating and engaging. And really, there is something, I believe, for everyone, something that piques everybody's interest. And I do want to go back to your comment, Rocky, about, in terms of location. Again, the blocks also are designed and set up, to your point about, making sure that there's cultural activities and experiences available to people outside of the Uptown area. Again, that is where people typically think of to come. And there are lots of great programs and opportunities to engage in Uptown. But everybody's not interested in coming to Uptown, especially maybe our residents, our neighbors who live further north or further south. And so that too is really a big part of the program in terms of accessibility, making sure that these programs and these experiences are easily accessible for our neighbors. I mentioned seniors earlier. When we think about our seniors, and not that all seniors go to bed early, and I consider myself a senior. I have a pretty early bedtime because I get up early in the morning. But if you think about those of us, I'll say that, who maybe go to bed early, while we might have transportation to come uptown, we might have the financial means to buy opening night tickets to a performance, the time of day might be a hindrance for some. And so even those things are considered when developing and scheduling Culture Blocks programs. So we partner also with the Senior Nutrition Program, and a lot of the programs for seniors happen in conjunction with some of the senior nutrition delivery meal sites where our senior neighbors are going to get a meal. So either before they receive a meal or after, oftentimes there's a cultural opportunity and experience for them to have and to engage. If you think about, people's work schedules are very different, right? So the evening is not always the optimal time for opportunities for people to have cultural experiences. So we really try to meet the needs of our residents in any way possible. And if there is a challenge and if there is feedback of, hey, have you all considered doing this? Again, we're open to that, right? Like there might be things we've not thought about in terms of how we deliver programs that could benefit our neighbors. And I'll say, nobody will tell you the pandemic was good. The pandemic, though, has shown us that there are ways to deliver programs to residents that we hadn't thought of prior to the pandemic, and that is through virtual delivery. And through virtual delivery, it has allowed us to reach residents and neighbors that maybe because they are homebound and have some really limiting physical conditions or challenges, that they're not able to easily get out of their homes to engage in cultural experiences. And so even by way of delivering programs virtually, we've been able to reach neighbors and residents to have cultural experiences that haven't been able to before now.
So regardless of what happens, continuing the virtual program will continue, even if we
yes, I feel pretty confident.
Mm-hmm. That's awesome. And I know
yes, because again,
I was just going to mention, I've seen firsthand the positive impact these programs have had on some of the library's regional and neighborhood branches. And it's been great to partner with your organization. And we have Shante Namos here, and she was going to mention a little bit about our partnership with Culture Blocks. Shante.
Sure, I can talk about that. Good morning, everyone. My name is Shante Namos. I have a new title, actually. I am the Senior Program Manager, Adult Services. It's the same job, just new title. We did class and comp at the county here. Our partnership with Culture Blocks has been something that's been in existence before I was in this role. I started this job in 2018. So I think at this point been in this job more in a virtual environment than an in-person environment. But the Culture Blocks program is just something that's really phenomenal for libraries because it expands our ability to offer cultural programs that we would not be able to offer otherwise. Artists can be paid at the rate they need to be paid, not dependent on our programming budget, which is relatively small. And it really allows us to offer a wide variety of programs. So the library staff can be the hosts and the coordinators and working with the artists to facilitate these programs and provide programs that otherwise would be just impossible for us to offer. So we have library branches at 20 locations across the county. So we are nestled in different neighborhoods and areas all around. So we have a wide reach. So it's a really great partnership because ASC is able to provide their expertise in vetting and providing funding for these artists, and then libraries within the identified zip code blocks can then offer those programs. So I did pull a few stories of impact from some of our residents that have come to programs, and I will say, I think the experience doing this virtually has been really interesting because I think some programs, it was just like, how do you offer this virtually for our programs as the library as well as partner programs? And there's one in particular, the Clayworks program, where they're teaching, they can pick up a block of clay at the library and then they can go home and either watch on YouTube how to do it on their own, or they can join a Zoom call live and work with a teacher. And you have families, people of all ages doing it together. That program, I hear constant wonderful feedback from people about how much they love that program. They want it to continue virtually and in person every day forever. They love that program. But let me just share one piece of feedback. This is from our librarian, Letitia, at the Hickory Grove location that's been a Clayworks host for many, many years. And she sent me this piece of feedback. It says, "This month I had the pleasure of meeting Sametta Grigsby. Sametta is a mother of 3. She came to pick up Clayworks supplies for a family program. While talking to her, I found out she was from Concord and was leaving Hickory Grove, heading to North County for supplies for another online activity. She stated she could not afford to put her children in camp, so she was so pleased we had online activities. Ms. Grigsby was provided a handout for another ASC program. I spoke to her at the end of the Clayworks program. She was ecstatic and asked when the next program would be and thanked me for everything because her children had fun. I feel that we as a library system were able to make an impact on her and her 3 children." So I feel like that really shows we have a lot of like super users, as we call them, that will go to multiple locations and get as much out of these programs as they can. So somebody that doesn't have the financial means to put their child in a summer program can go to get all the resources, watch the stuff online. So it's been a really phenomenal program for the library.
Tay, may I add to that? I had worked early in the year at South Boulevard Library, and they do offer the Clayworks program too. And I gather they probably still do that. So that's another location that offers that on South Boulevard.
Yeah, South Boulevard and Hickory Grove are our biggest Clayworks locations. Very popular there.
I remember I was at Independence for about 1.5 years, and it was huge there. And just the day when they came back to pick up the items they'd made, it was blissful chaos, just, you know, smiles. And
So here's a question. So what about, like, I know we've talked about seniors and such. What has been the connection or of any with Culture Blocks in, say, into the schools, maybe the high schools or at a community college level? Because some of the conversations I've had about the art scene, you know, in Charlotte has been, you know, trying to create a more localized art scene, you know, where instead of going to IKEA to buy your picture, why couldn't you buy, you know, a picture from a local artist and try to, you know, so folks can actually make art an actual trade or an actual, you know, something that they could subsist in. And so a lot of that comes from, you know, identifying, you know, those folks, you know, either graduating or at the community college level, and figuring out ways to get them opportunities to sort of subsist. And I had heard, so I just kind of want to see where is Arts and Science Council and Culture Blocks or any of the other programs been in trying to plug in with sort of that sort of movement of trying to, sort of incubate a local artist space.
So in terms of like a space, we don't really have or provide like physical space, but in terms of opportunities, and so I can speak a little bit to Culture Blocks. While the programs for Culture Blocks for youth and children don't happen during the school day, during the school hours because the children are in school, there are programs like for preschoolers that happen during the day. There are programs that are geared towards middle schoolers or teenagers. Again, to your point of trying to help nurture and to develop some of the talent and the skills that many of our younger neighbors have. And so I can think of, for example, there is an event, there's a screening tomorrow. It is an organization called Creating Exposure Through the Arts that they have through Culture Blocks funding and Cultural Vision Grant funding have been working on a project. And through Culture Blocks, they have been doing basically photography classes. So teaching students, teaching young people how to use a camera. It can be a DSLR or it can be using your camera, your iPhone or your camera phone to take pictures. They teach them about exposure and lighting and things of that nature. And those are really geared towards middle school, high school students. They receive training from professional photographers. So we're talking about high quality programming. One of the great things that they did 2 years ago was while the students were learning, they also went into a community and did family photos, knowing that for some families who can't afford to take professional family photos, they went into a community and did family photos that were able to be given to these families with a picture frame. And so these families have professional family photos. Interestingly enough, with the Cultural Vision Grant funding that they received, they created a documentary called Behind the Ink, and that is actually being screened. That screening is being shown tomorrow at Victoria Yards. And so again, these young people receive professional training. For some of our other teams, one of the other groups that's done a lot of great work is Guerrilla Poets, and they do spoken word and poetry. And so it has been a great opportunity for youth to not only be able to use and express their voice, but they're also able to maybe tackle some maybe difficult issues and subjects and be able to express themselves in ways that may otherwise be uncomfortable or challenging or different. And so we are really intentional about making sure that there's programming for our neighbors of all ages across the county. I think, Liz, were you gonna?
I was just going to add to that, Ebony. I think this is where cultural vision grants and culture blocks are really intentionally designed to complement each other so that we are really supporting arts throughout the full community in really meaningful ways. So while culture blocks typically takes place in libraries and recreation centers, cultural vision grants can occur anywhere and oftentimes give organizations or creative individuals the extra funding they need to be able to leverage spaces where they're already creating. And so I think of the partnership that we've had in supporting DigiBridge. And DigiBridge offers STEAM and STEM programming after school and on Saturdays at schools. And so they're really developing partnerships with the teachers at the schools and with the families served by those schools so that after the school hours, they're still engaging those students in really meaningful and exciting kind of exploration of using technology and deepening their interest in science and mathematics and having access to really bridge that digital divide. So I think that's an important place where sometimes DigiBridge is partnering with culture blocks to do programming in the libraries and in recreation centers, but we also support them through cultural vision grants to bring it to places where they already have relationships developed and built in meaningful ways. I think to your point of how do we also lift up opportunities for artists, one of the cultural vision grants that we had this last year was a grant to Carla Erin Lopez through Project Rough Cuts, and she was able to work with the Mint Museum to do a pop-up gallery that featured over 50 local Black and Latino and otherwise underrepresented artists, where they got to showcase their work at the Mint Museum. It was incredible. There was a line out the door for that whole weekend for folks to go in and see that exhibit. Yeah.
Oh, that's, go ahead.
I just want to add one last thing. I know we need to move on to public art as well. We want to make sure that Brandella has plenty of time. The one last thing I wanted to say about culture blocks in terms of the funding model is that, as Liz mentioned earlier, with culture blocks funding, you do not have to have a 501c3 status or designation to be able to apply for and receive funding. And I really like to make sure to mention this, while the purpose of the Culture Blocks program is to serve our neighbors, our residents across Mecklenburg County, it also does provide a funding opportunity for creative individuals who might be limited to funding opportunities because maybe you're required to have a 501c3 status. And so I really like to make sure to mention that as well. As Shanta mentioned, you know, with the funding, while the programs are free for residents, the funding does cover the cost to deliver the program. So materials, supplies, as well as, and what's really important, is also the fees for the artists, those that have the talent to do the work, that are delivering the programs, because we want to make sure that those creatives and the organizations that deliver the program are compensated adequately for their talent.
So
Okay,
before we go,
we heard public art, and that's definitely one of my favorite areas. So let's go to that.
Actually, one more question before we move on. I know we're starting to get pressed for time, but how many of the Culture Blocks programs were designed by the person? Did people come in with ideas for their? Do they approach you with the ideas, or?
Yes, there is. So there's an application that we say providers. These are the creative individuals in the organizations. They will submit an application outlining kind of the work and the program that they want to do with, you know, location, dates, frequency. So for example, if it is like an ongoing program that's going to take place every Saturday for 3 months, or if it's a one-day event, there's an application process, and the applications are reviewed and approved for funding by a panel that is made up of community members. And actually, because of our community partnership, it's really important that we have partners from the library and from Recreation Center on that panel. One of them happens to be with us today, Shante. And so again, because the money is funded by the county, it's important that community also has input on the programs that are approved. And so we have members from our advisory board, we have community members who represent some of the different blocks that make up the panel to make the decisions about how the funding is.
Yeah. I just, if there were 501c3 wasn't a prerequisite, I just didn't know if there were other parameters that were necessary, but it sounds like it's pretty open-ended.
Yeah, it
awesome. Is. Okay, so now we can move to public art.
And next slide, please. Good morning. Again, Randella Foster, ASC's project manager for public art. Excited to be here. I'd like to just begin by answering the question, what is public art? So public art is artistic work that is within the public realm. It's free for the enjoyment of the people. No ticket is required. So that means, like, no matter what your socioeconomic status is, you can have this cultural experience. And that's what I really love about public art. Public art is often site specific, meaning it's created in response to the place and the community where it will reside. That often incorporates pride within that neighborhood, you know, to protect that and take care of that artwork. The artwork often interprets the history of the place, its people, and sometimes it can address social or environmental issues. Public art can take a wide range of forms, sizes, and scales: murals, sculpture, integrated architecture, digital, environmental, functional art, and it can also be temporary or permanent. Public art's diverse nuances provide numerous opportunities for people to engage and experience art in their daily lives. Next slide. So a little about the ASC Public Art Program. So we manage the Public Art Program for Mecklenburg County, the City of Charlotte, and the airport, which is also a part of the city. We have been managing public art since 1992. But then in 2002, 2003, we took over managing this public art ordinance. It's a percent for art ordinance that was adopted by Mecklenburg County and the city of Charlotte, so that 1% of all eligible capital improvement project funds can be used for public art. We facilitate the planning, the artist selection, contracting, community engagement, as well as the facilitation of fabrication and installation. We also have oversight by the Public Art Commission, which is a 9-member board that 3 of the representatives are selected by the city, 3 are selected by county, and 3 by ASC. So these are community members. Some of them have art backgrounds, some do not. That way we have a good mix on this board as well. Currently, we have 173 projects completed. We recently installed 2 projects. We've had even though there was a long year of the pandemic, we installed 14 public art projects in fiscal year 20. Like, I think we set a record like way above. Typically, I think we averaged 5 or 6 per year, but we kept things moving during the pandemic. So we're excited about bringing those cultural experiences to the Charlotte Mecklenburg area. Next slide, please. So our mission is to promote the cultural heritage and artistic development of the Charlotte Mecklenburg area. We want to enhance Charlotte Mecklenburg's history and identity, contribute to economic development and tourism. We also want to be able to add that warmth and dignity and beauty and accessibility to public spaces and expand the experiences and participation of residents with visual arts. I will say that I was delighted Lawrence is on this call as well, and he shared that he works at South County Library, and I worked with regional artist Jim Gallucci to install Open Book, Open Mind at the library in October of 2020. That is a really popular project. It's whimsical, vibrant in color. It's a canopy outside of the entrance to the library that has laser cut book titles as well as the author. You can stand underneath and just, try to read all of the titles, but it has a very significant presence from those that may be traveling on Ray Road. Community engagement is really important in our public art process. We work with artists to always have a community engagement meeting. Some have 2. We ask that artists have experience working with, and that's a priority for them. With Jim Gallucci, his community engagement was really well attended. Susan Rodriguez McDowell, the commissioner for that district, was there, as well as we had a lot of library participants. The library itself actually provided those book titles and authors, a very diverse set of authors that were represented. And then during the community engagement, the participants were allowed to submit their thoughts on what the title of the artwork should be. So we gathered all those together, and I listed a survey while the library was actually closed for renovation. They were able to vote on what they thought the title should be. And so it became Open Book, Open Mind. And Lawrence said that, they recently had, I think, a hybrid virtual grand opening. And he said they created t-shirts with Open Book, Open Mind. And he said he would share that. So Lawrence, if you could hold that up and share that, that would be wonderful.
This is a staff t-shirt that we have. This is the back of our staff t-shirt. So on the front, of course, it says Charlotte Mecklenburg Library, but on the back we have Welcome Home, and it does show the canopy. So I can't remember what's on the rest of the t-shirt, but we do have that as a promotion. And again, this is what staff have to wear as far as like when on times where staff might wear a library t-shirt. Thank you, Lawrence. Thank you for sharing that. I was really excited. I might see if I can get one of those t-shirts too. But so are there any
questions, I mean, granted, this was a really brief intro. Of course, you're welcome to reach out to me if you have, we can answer some questions now. And then, of course, if we run out of time, feel free to reach out to me as well with any additional questions. Right now, we have a pretty robust program. Fiscal year 20, we had invested, well, city and county had invested over 20 million into public art. Right now, we have about 45 projects in progress at various stages. We have a few installations coming up in the next couple of months as well. So we stay pretty busy, and we're excited about the work that we do that, you know, allows everyone to experience art and culture.
I have a question, and I guess it could go to Randall, to you, Ebony, I guess Liz too. You all receive feedback, I'm sure, when you have the different programs, and of course, the big thing you do, Randall, for where you actually have like a group come and you have a big program where the art is presented to the public. When you have those feedback, when you get feedback from those who come, how do they say they find out about the event? What do they tend to say?
So for us, when we have, I think you're speaking of our public art dedications. So for those, we advertise as on the ASC website as well as our social media. But depending upon who the stakeholder owner is, city or county, we rely on their communications department to actually advertise that as well. When we have community engagements, which we really, you know, since we had to go virtual with those as well, we've actually had more participation than we've, you know, before the pandemic, and we had, you know, to have folks to come out in person. So we advertise those on social media. We actually, like, you know, pull up the listing of city has like a neighborhood listing, and, you know, I do a lot of grassroots work trying to get folks in there because their voice is important to the artwork that's being created. So I will reach out to homeowner associations and say, hey, public art's coming to your neighborhood. We really like for you to participate, meet the artist, find out about the plans for the project. And if the artist has a concept at that time, they share that. They get feedback from the community. And community members also participate on those artist selection panels that we have. We want to make sure the community is a part of what we're doing, because the artwork belongs to city and county and thereby the residents as well.
Well, and I would just add to that, Ebony already talked about the texting program that we've got for Culture Blocks, but if folks want to get kind of regular updates about the programs that are supported through ASC and the other cultural programs that are happening in Charlotte, I encourage you go to ASC's website, artsandscience.org, and at the bottom of the page, you can sign up for our newsletter, and you can select the Culture Picks newsletter, and that's going to be a weekly newsletter that's going to give you a highlight of programming that's happening in the next 10 days that are ways that you can connect your family to opportunities that are happening. And that's going to include things like our Culture Blocks programs, like the public art engagements, as well as programs that are supported through Cultural Vision grants and other pieces there. So that's an easy way to kind of get a regular boost of opportunities that you can engage.
All right. Well, do we have any
Thanks.
other towards the end here? So do we have any questions from the audience? Well, I would just like to say thank you to everybody from Arts and Science and obviously from the library for coming out and explaining and telling the community about really a brand new day, I think, in arts funding here in the Charlotte area. I think that it's a fantastic new development in many respects, that now I think there is going to be more of a focus on the community and arts and opportunities available. So, you know, I think that's a great thing. And of course, you saw that website, www.artsandsciencecouncil, it's artsandscience.org, and you see it in the chat. I just also want to remind our audience, and is that the Arts and Science Council is itself a 501c3 public charity. And again, this support, while they do get support from the county and other funders. It can be publicly supported, and you can receive, a tax deduction on supporting the activities of the Arts and Science Council as well. So I don't really have anything else to say. So Greg, do you have anything you want to share, or anyone else from the library about today's program before we shove off?
Just want to thank everyone for being here, and we look forward to programming in the upcoming year. And I'm glad that even though the last 18 months have been chaotic, it seems like some good new practices have been put into place. We're also kind of using that same playbook. So I just wish you guys the best, and thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, everybody.